and asked him, and he said he was going to be there. So
Okay.
he did say 8:30 in the morning was quite early for him.
It looks like he just joined.
Oh, great.
Perfect.
Thank you. You guys have a better
I
view
was
than I
poking
do.
around looking. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. I will go ahead and call the
All right.
meeting. I'll call the meeting to order, and I want to welcome everybody and just extend a real sincere thank you to everybody for being here. Barry, thanks for making your schedule available. I also want to thank staff and for being flexible and attending whenever we were able to all be here. And also really appreciate the information that we received yesterday, the draft proposal from staff. That was very helpful and important for us to be able to see before this morning. So thank you to everybody for that. Do we have any public comment?
We did not receive any notice of anybody wanting to speak at public comment today, and we didn't receive any written public comment.
Great, thank you. Well, I just want to start by saying I was very encouraged seeing the staff draft proposal. I think that we are actually much closer, the committee and staff are much closer in our views at this point than we perhaps were when we started this process in January and February. So that's just my personal sense is I'm encouraged as we go forward. I think we actually agree on quite a lot, and hope we can keep an eye to that also as we're working through today and discussing. The time today, I'd like to think about it and dividing it up in this sense of staff's going to make a presentation, take about 10 minutes. And I will give you a heads up. I think you'll probably be well within that, but I will apologize in advance if I give you a heads up about a minute or two before, if you're getting close to 10 minutes, just so we can stay on track. Then I'd like to divide the remaining time between discussions so that the committee can ask any questions of Barry or of staff. We have a chance to get into anything there, and also identify those areas where we agree. And then if there are sticking points, gonna hone in on those and see what it is that we might need to still hash through. And then the last 20 or 30 minutes, I'd like to reserve for the committee to be able to make a plan, hopefully with staff, but a plan about how we want to go forward to council, because this is our last chance to talk before the Tuesday presentation to council. So if we divide that remaining time about evenly, I think we'll be in good shape. So if there are no questions to start out, I will turn it over to staff for their presentation. Are there any questions before we move forward, or thoughts? That's agreeable to everybody, then let's go ahead, and thanks to staff for your presentation, and turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Elaine. Also, and I'm sorry, I don't know your last name, Jason.
Smith.
Jason Smith is here. He's the division chief from the Cannon Beach Rural Fire District. Mark could not be here. And so anyway, but really appreciate him being here.
Thank you, Jason. I haven't, you guys are all very tiny on my screen, so I don't know. So I'm glad to know you're here. Thanks.
Yep, thank you.
Yep. And Barry, are you ready to you did the map for us and you were at the meeting on the 4th. Are you ready to kind of walk us through, if you would?
Sure, if you like.
Yes, please.
Okay, this map represents kind of the collective thinking from the last meeting. And I can just kind of, I volunteered basically to pull it together because I had all the existing base layers. And so that's how I ended up pulling this map together. In our discussion, there was a focus on the two roads, which were kind of named Road A and Road B, and we sort of took away those labels here and just are referring to them by the kind of the road system that they stem from. But the Volmer Road extension, I guess, if you will, is labeled there. And the consensus was that it would be important to bring that road to the power line for access, because the power line represents a kind of a high-risk zone for wildfire ignition. And so that would involve a little bit of road repair, essentially, There's a kind of a stream crossing that used to have a culvert, a functioning culvert, and that culvert has been plugged up for years. And it's actually kind of an area that needs to be repaired either way. So repairing that and putting in a functioning culvert would be the proper thing to provide access. And I believe that extension is about 1,800 feet beyond the current kind of rocked road that was used in the 2013 restoration work. So that's that segment. The other segment comes off the Tolovana road system. And that one in the previous map was labeled as extending beyond the red dot and coming down towards the West Fork of Ecola Creek, which is not advisable in any measure. I think that was just a kind of an honest mistake in the initial mapping. No one really is advocating for extending it beyond where it first meets the power line at the red dot. In any event, that road that continues toward the West Fork of the Ecola Creek is breached, I think, in one spot, and is actually kind of how that wetland area came to be many decades ago. So we're planning to just leave that alone. So that road segment actually doesn't need much work. It just needs to kind of be cleaned and maybe regraded a bit. There might be a few areas that might need a little bit of rock so that the trucks, the emergency trucks, can get in there. And then a turnaround would need to be installed at each of the red dot locations. The final piece is a very small spur in the south. Yeah, that one there. There was some discussion about the importance of having access to make sure the area around the springs was protected in the event of a fire. Thank you for highlighting those. And that road segment to the left, which had not previously been really discussed, came up as an option. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with that, but it's a relatively flat road, kind of a low risk road location. And it was a well-rocked, well-built road that basically provided access. That area is an area of younger forest. And so when Weyerhaeuser, the previous owner, had put that road in and harvested that area. So that's kind of an easy opportunity to get another access point without really having to do much other than just clearing that existing road. And again, that's a fairly kind of gentle terrain, low risk. There's no stream crossings. So that's kind of the quick summary. I'll turn it back to the staff.
Jillian, does anybody have any questions on what's being proposed?
Well, I think we may, yeah. I want to give staff the opportunity if there's anything else you want to add. I have really 2, maybe 3 questions, but I also want to hear from the other committee members. I just see really two issues. I think one is an opportunity and one is an issue that we haven't talked about in detail yet. But is there anything else staff wants to add before we check in with the committee members?
Yeah, I just want to point out that this is our critical area. And if there's a problem and we can keep this, from burning, we've got the opportunity to potentially station a truck here. And I think it's about 1,400 feet. They carry 1,500 feet of hose, same distance from this location. It's less than ideal, but it's something that can at least provide some opportunity if we lose the access to the road off of Bell Creek. So that's these 2 locations, especially when the suggestion was made to go ahead and open this up. I think Barry made that suggestion, is that really helps us for what our, one of our primary concerns. So that's all I have to add, Jillian.
Okay.
And thanks, Barry, thanks for getting the map done, and thanks for the presentation.
Thank you all. So again, I think there are, in terms of what the committee has been proposing, and that's also in the packet. Barry, I don't know if you had a chance to look at that. We've been real specific about each of the roads.
Yeah,
And
I
in
did
just
get a chance. Thank you.
Okay, great. You did? Okay, great. In just a second, I want to go around with all the committee members and kind of get our questions on board and any other comments. But again, I think our proposal and what staff is now proposing for what was Road A, I'm pointing at this, but you can't see that I'm pointing at it, but the Tolovana Road is really in alignment. We see that road as being functional at this point. It's rock bed. It has truck tracks on it all the time. It's being used now. So that revision on staff's part, I think, really comes into alignment with what the committee was proposing. I think there's still a question about the lower section of the Volmer Road system, and that's what I would like to focus on. I'd also like to focus on the power lines and some information that I now have from reviewing the easement, the actual easement for the access to the power lines. Those are the two things I'd like to come back to. But could we go around with the committee? I'd like to just hear from everybody what your questions might be and comments, anything that you'd like to address in our discussion today. And again, I'm kind of, oh good, my cursor's working now. I see Stacy, so let's start with Stacy and then I'll move through in the order I see you guys.
Good morning, everybody. I think the city's plan is a really good balance. It protects the environment, it protects our watershed, and it also protects the city in case of fire. So I think it's a really nice plan.
Okay, any questions or anything you'd like to follow up on?
I don't have any questions.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Barb?
I have no questions. I agree with Stacy. I think that we have come up with a compromise that I hoped we would come up with. And I do think the questions that Jelaine is going to ask would be the same questions that I would have. So thank you very much.
Great. And, we'll obviously we can discuss if things come up, just,
Right.
jump in as we're continuing to go on.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Les?
Well, thank you, Bruce. Thank you, Barry. This has been really helpful to look at. I appreciate it very much. I actually do have a couple of questions, but I don't think that they're really that important to this discussion. I like what we're seeing. I feel comfortable that there's a compromise in there that is really going to work well for everyone. My questions are around, there was some, I understand the road bed and the road width requirements. There was some conversations just that I overheard talking about, the tree cover, and it's for these road segments that are going to be maintained. Is there going to be any need to actually do any tree cutting and clearing above the roads, or are we really just talking about rocking and mowing?
I'll defer to Barry on that one.
Yeah, that's a great question. We didn't really get to that level of detail in terms of specifications, but the firefighters in the room basically said they only needed about a 14-foot wide running surface, which is really, pretty small. It's kind of a small footprint. And I don't know how tall their vehicles are, but I would be in favor of basically just maintaining kind of a pruning. Sorry, what was that?
I'm sorry, I just asked Jason how tall the trucks were based on your question. He said the tallest is 10 foot.
10 foot, yeah.
And
So
and also what the firefighters requested was 14 to 16 feet.
14 to 16 on the width, okay.
Yes.
The 14 to 16 foot running width. And then, so I would be in favor of just kind of a maintenance program that focused on pruning branches that might be kind of extending down into that kind of that corridor that the vehicles need to go through, rather than something more than that. I don't think that that's in anyone's interest to have a big road kind of right away cut through, but I would defer back maybe to the fire folks if they have comments on that. But that's kind of where we ended up on that. We didn't make a lot of specific recommendations.
I think that if there's an area that they want to make sure is particularly clear, that's the turnaround. Because
Correct, yeah.
they will go there and turn around and go back to wherever they're going to work. And without that turnaround, they won't go in.
Correct, yeah. And so the turnaround can either be designed as a circular turnaround or as a kind of a spot for a three-point turn. And that again also is to be determined a little bit. What's the appropriate design to kind of minimize impact?
Okay,
Also,
thank you.
if I can, just a second left, the staff will work with Barry and the fire departments as far as the designs on each of those locations. They may all three of them be different depending on conditions, but we plan on working with Barry throughout this.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you very much for all that input. One last question, and only because it really didn't get discussed earlier in the week. For the roads, the one coming off the Volmer, and then the what I consider the new one coming in from the southwest, are we planning to put gates up similar to the one coming off of Tovana? Is that just implicit in this, or is that
Yes.
a discussion point?
Yes, we will have gates.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jillian.
Great, okay. Betty? Is Betty here?
I don't see her up there.
She
Betty,
was-
you're muted.
Are you muted, Betty?
Sorry,
Oh, there you are. Okay.
I
great.
have two questions. One is the bottom road that was discussed last time. How do you get to that road? Are those dotted lines a accessible road, or I don't see how we're getting to the red part of that road.
I believe that's the Warren Main Line. That's going to be off the Warren Main Line, which is off of Warren Way. They're off the Tolovana exit, and that's the Tolovana Main Line. Is the Tolovana Main Line?
Yeah, so over
Okay.
by the watershed, that'll get you all the way, and also Warren Way will get you to the Tolovana highway system up there, which
Right.
if you go north, you're gonna encounter,
I think the question was for this.
That one's Warren, I think, isn't it?
yeah, that's gonna be an offspurt from down below off the Tolovana main line also.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for that. And the second thing is, the fire danger is so great because of people and the power lines. What is the power company doing to mitigate this so that the roads are going to be less important? I mean, those power lines are starting fires in California. Is the state really on a high alert on this, or is this just something we have to live with?
Well, Betty, I want to hear staff's response, but that is one of the things I really want to focus on when it comes back around to my turn. I've got some questions and some information about the power lines, and I think there's a real opportunity here for the city to work with the power company based on the conditions in the easement that the power company has with the city. And I've looked at that easement in detail and have highlighted those conditions that are specific to fire suppression. And the power company has some responsibilities here. So I don't know if we want to pause on that till we come back to it, but that's very much something I'd like to discuss with staff also. So I don't know if staff has any input now, or if we want to wait till we've gone all the way around and then come back to it.
Well, just in general, the conditions that we have in Cannon Beach, that we have on this power line are conditions that exist throughout the Pacific Powers District. And so they are, as part of their maintenance, they are trying to go ahead and keep up. But as we all know, I mean, these things are 50, 60 years old, and they have not gotten to them. So I don't know if we would be able to get like a complete rebuild or anything in this area. They're aware of our concerns. But they're just, from a maintenance standpoint, they're not funded to take care of everything they've got in the district.
Betty, is that good for the moment? And then we can come back around to it and kind of elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, let's come back to it. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. And then Bob, did you have any questions or initial input here?
I guess
Regarding
I'm pleased with what I'm hearing. I wanted to come back to something that hasn't otherwise come up, and I mentioned just almost in passing at the last meeting, and that is the idea of making use of drones both at the time of a fire for having visibility with much more flexibility than getting somebody up in a truck on a high place, and also for being able to monitor.
Considering drones for forestry. I'm not sure.
Sorry, Bob, you're a little bit muted or murky there. Could you
I
also for monitoring?
think Bruce is chatting with somebody. Well,
oh,
with his mic open. To be able to monitor activity in the reserve without having to be able to drive around all the time. But that's sort of coming from left field, I admit, and maybe I should have thought of this earlier in the discussion, but I think it's something potentially useful. I appreciate seeing Barry nodding there. Barry, do you have some experience with this or something that you could bring in?
Well,
I apologize as far as a matter of running the meeting. Maybe I shouldn't be the one who is inviting somebody who's not a committee member. If that's okay with you, Jelaine.
Sure, absolutely.
Right.
Just real quick. I mean, one of our foresters just got a FAA license for flying a drone, and it's exactly for that reason. Just the incredible efficiency of being able to put that up there and kind of see a lot in a short period of time. The fire chief was talking at our last meeting about how important it was to have a fire lookout and some high points where you can look down. And we didn't have a chance to ask him, but I would think that a drone would be incredibly helpful in that regard. So yeah, I think it's worth pursuing.
And there's a huge range of prices on those and capabilities. And it seems to me that even some of the relatively inexpensive ones, in the context of the costs that we're talking about, would be useful.
Yeah. Can you let Jason address the drone issue with the fire department?
Yeah, so drones are a great asset to everybody. The issue with drones in a fire sense is it's competing airspace with air assets. We have aircraft that are flying overhead that actually have the ability to drop water onto the fire and pinpoint locate where the fire is. And so if the drones are flying, they can't. And so it is an asset, but in the fire sense, we're going to have aircraft up there. They're going to assist us in pinpointing that location. And then it's utilizing these road systems to figure out best access to make our way to that fire area. So, and the roads aren't just for access, but if we need to hold the fire at a road, being able to utilize these roads to prevent further spread is critical.
Thank you, Jason. I certainly wasn't envisioning talking about times when there would be manned aircraft in the sky there, in the air. But thank you for pointing that out.
No, I think there's a possibility here just because it is so much less invasive than a road. The one aspect that I haven't heard mentioned here is the possible impact on wildlife of drones. I do not know much about drones, so I imagine there's some variability there, but I think it would be important to identify how they can be used for monitoring, but also have some really clear specifications about what they can and can't do in those forest systems, how low they can fly, how regular the monitoring is, and the potential impact, because I have had them flying around my head on the beach, for example, and they're really intrusive. So I imagine if I were, a herd of something in the wild, that would not be a great thing to have the drones flying around. So I think they could be a real asset, but Barry, maybe you can speak to that. And I don't know if there are already guidelines or regulations in place for that kind of thing in wild areas, but I think that'd be important, and maybe OWEB would want to weigh in on that too. Or Barry, I don't know, do you have any?
Yeah, just real quick, all the drones that are flying over the beach, that's all in violation of FAA rules. So that's all illegal.
Good to know.
Not supposed to be happening. But I agree, you'd have to think through it and make sure you're not interfering with any particular, nesting season, for example. That's the kind of disturbance that could have negative impacts. So.
Great. So if that's a recommendation we decide we want to make, then I think we'd just want to include language that would need to coordinate really specifically about habitat and wildlife impacts and how that can be mitigated. Okay, great. Thank you. Did I get everybody? I think so. Okay, great. Well, the two areas that I wanted to focus on are I've mentioned before. One I have mentioned before. The other has been mentioned by other members of the committee. That is the lower section of this Volmer Road and the power lines, and they're related. So if I'm going to try yet again to share my screen, and if there's anything that the technical people there can help me with, but I am going to click share screen.
Give me
Okay.
a second, Jelaine. I have to turn off our screen sharing first.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then I've got just a couple of images here. One is a map, but anyway, let me see first if I can get this to work. So I'm going to click share screen, desktop, and I'm going to try to make this play. Are you guys seeing a map?
Not yet.
Okay. This is, I do not know why this seems to elude me. What I'm getting at here, oh, there we go. I think I've maybe unlocked the
Success.
you can see my desktop. Okay, now this map is one that I have found really, really useful in this discussion. This is also from the plan update. Barry will recognize it. And this, I have in orange here, put the proposed roads and this additional one. The piece I am really concerned about is from here, oops. From this point, can you guys see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, this dotted line section to here. And I think part of the issue here is that perhaps the folks that, you're looking at a map and seeing access to the power line, which I really understand from the firefighting perspective. But if you haven't been down there and actually walked the road, it's really hard to get a sense of how abruptly and how significantly that changes at that dotted line. The dotted line means it's a trail. And I think Barry spoke to that. This is that kind of like, it's kind of grassy here, but still identifiably rock road. And then it's much more improved up above. So I just want to show a couple of images. Oh, the other thing about this map that I think is really, really important is it shows the forest type. This is recently logged. This dark green is the conifer, which is a higher fire risk. And this is our riparian floodplain. And the placement of this, the extent of it, and how it relates to the springs and how it relates to the conifer forests up above is really significant, because while I understand, and we heard this on March 18th, that there are conditions, in the most extreme conditions, the riparian forest can burn. This is alder dominated, it's hardwood, it is much harder to burn. But it would have to be the kind of condition of a completely uncontrolled fire in the conifer forest that's being blown by east winds into the riparian forest if this had dried out sufficiently. That's not to say that's not a risk, and I understand that's important to consider. But when we're talking about the springs here, you know, it's important to see that there are buffers here. There are areas that are naturally much more resistant to fire, and that they are between the conifer forest and the highway. So that is important, and Barry can speak to that more. But specifically, this dotted line section where it drops right down into that area. This is just going back. I noticed in the draft staff report, I just thought you guys might want to amend this. That upper culvert was replaced. I think Bruce made reference to a culvert that was supposed to be replaced and that the stream flows over the road. If that was referring to the upper culvert, that was actually replaced. This is a picture of that I took when I was up there. And then there is a lower one on that dotted line section, and that I think is the one that Barry was talking about. But the upper one has been replaced. There's no water flowing over. Here are a couple of pictures of the upper road where it's rocked, just to give you an idea. This is near the section that was at that thinning project. It's just below the spur road where everybody was looking on the tour. This is what the road actually looks like, just below that blackberry infested area. It's pretty wide, it's pretty open, pretty easily to move through. I took a picture of my walking stick right at the point that the road becomes dotted line. Now I took pictures all the way along, but I'm just showing you a couple to show you the upper section. This is what we're talking about at the dotted line. On the left side, it drops off abruptly down into more alder woods and wetland. It goes up steeply on the right. That's Barry, this might be where that culvert, but this is a tributary that runs right across the proposed route. So again, we're talking about this area down to the power line. It's very different than this. And what it would entail my question is, the damage that it would do to the habitat, the cost that it would, the cost to the habitat primarily, but just trying to put a road in here, how much benefit do you get when there is already an access to the power line right here? This is not a huge distance. This is already accessible to the power line. There's access to the power line from the top. And if this road came here and a turnaround was created in this area, maybe even using this little old section of road, it would preserve this really sensitive habitat where I think the risk is much lower. You could see how wet it was there. That's my question. This is the piece I think that hasn't been addressed. And is there an option that would still preserve access to the conifer forest? So I'd like to get some input on that and then speak to the power lines and the easement to the power lines. But that's my second issue. So I'm going to pause here and see if maybe Barry, if you can weigh in on this related both to the habitat and the possibility of doing this road just to the dotted line.
Sure, Jelaine, thanks. Yeah, and yeah, this is really helpful to see this map with the forest types. That is kind of a missing layer. I guess, I would just defer to the firefighters and their sense of what's strategically important. I'm not a firefighter, so I can't really speak to the relative advantage of having that additional access point on the power line. I do know that prior to our 2013 project, there were portions of that highlighted road that didn't look that different from the photos you showed of the lower dashed road. Mm. And so I think it's all kind of a matter of wrapping your head around, once a road grade is put in, that's when most of the damage, so to speak, to the ecosystem takes place. And so there is an existing road grade that goes down on that dotted, it's very overgrown, but it's essentially, the landform has been altered, and to me, it just kind of makes sense to potentially utilize that and also to fix that stream crossing. So that stream crossing you showed, there is a culvert in that crossing that's been completely plugged and covered by just some probably natural erosion from upstream. And that's kind of at risk. That whole fill that fills that channel is artificial, and that's kind of at risk of collapsing and moving down through the watershed. That was actually probably the biggest road issue that we identified in the roads report we did a couple years ago. Something that needs to be addressed one way or the other, either pulled out and restored, or fixed and enabling that continued access. And I guess I would just say that when I first started working up there, it was clear to me that PP&L was using that whole road segment, even if it was just with ATVs, to get down to the power lines. I'm not sure if they've been doing that recently at all, but it just seems to me that if they're going to replace all those lines, they're going to need some kind of access down to that lower area. And so I'd be really curious to hear more about what you found, Jelaine, about the easement and what their responsibilities are. But if they have a right to access that, they're going to need to get vehicles down there somehow. So I guess that's kind of how I look at it.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And I think, one of our other committee members had mentioned the culverts lower down, and and we had even, had some, if the fire safety issues can be addressed without having to go down this section, I think that would be a good candidate for road decommissioning and dealing with those culverts at that time. My real question is, if you have access here, and if you have access here, this is not a huge stretch of distance, and you're able to, and the power lines are adequately maintained and cleared, is this really essential? That's really the question from a firefighting point of view. And I can speak to the power line now. Would that be a good time to, or I don't know if we want to hear from the fire folks regarding that question between access here and access here. Is this really?
I'll have Jason elaborate on it, but the distance there, pushing the wrong button, sorry. The distance here is over half a mile. So it's not an insubstantial amount of distance.
Well, yeah, I've walked the whole thing. I'm real familiar with it in there.
No,
so
well,
yeah, it's not super far, but yeah, but from the firefighting point of view, if you have access here and you have access here and the power line is clear, you can actually maneuver through there.
They felt it was important to have another access in between, but I'll let Jason elaborate on that.
Thanks.
Yeah, so, having not been in the previous meetings, there's probably some information that I don't currently have, but looking at the map and looking at the terrain and topography.
I'll get that back up, sorry.
Yeah, if you get a fire running in the tops of trees, it could spot miles away and actually have an ember carry miles away. So to bank on the more lush greenery from preventing that fire spread into the our red area down there, into our watershed, we can't always rely on that as being a preventative fire measure, because it could just jump over all of that lush greenery and pick up and spot and continue to spread. When it comes to the power line issue, just this last week, we had to locate 3 damaged insulators on that main power line. That was why the power went out. That is a huge safety issue for us when it comes to wildland fires, because that's going to be where our campaign fire starts within the forest. Is a power line insulator that shorts, power line falls, starts the grass spreads to the trees spread to the crowns of the trees, and now we have a running crown fire with the east wind running towards Cannon Beach. What I wanted to highlight was, even though that insulator was maybe a couple hundred yards from Cannon Beach proper, it took us a while to find it. And so imagine how many more power insulators are in there between here and going through that Eucla preserve area. And to not be able to drive into those areas and be able to access that takes time. And as that time builds, the fire is going to grow. So to have those access roads into these areas, to be able to, I mean, we have 1,300, if we can tie into that access road going along that dotted line, we still have 1,350 feet of area that we're gonna have to cover. That takes time with equipment, that takes time with hose lines, you know, but now you get rid of probably about 500 to 750 feet of that. That's just gonna add more time and make our mission a little more difficult to accomplish.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Jason, if you only have this access here and you don't have this access, you're gonna have to cross
the creek.
in order to gain access to the east.
Exactly. And so that's the concern is we're either gonna have to come down from the Volmer Roads, 1,350 feet to clear all that area, or we're gonna have to go to the dead end of the Tolovana access, then cross the creek, hopefully, if we can get through it, and then hike the 1,350 feet.
Exactly.
So it enables us better access to get on the other side of that fork. Having just run in Ecola Preserve on Wednesday, just the little crossing of the West Fork was difficult. So that is the same width as that North Fork, and that's a hazard for firefighters.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm mindful of our time, and I know that there are a couple other things we need to get to here. So the issue of this lower road, I'm going to set that aside now. I don't know, looking at the fire we have very good access with this road. That may be something to continue to discuss, but the main issue here, I just want to notice the power lines. In the easement, this goes back to 1964. I'm happy to send this out to anybody. And there was a revision in 2011 when the city bought the property, but it didn't change the easement. There are very specific considerations about prevention and suppression of fire. It acknowledges that putting those power lines in increases the fire hazard and that the power company has an obligation to keep the area free from inflammable debris, take all reasonable precautions to prevent forest, brush, and grass fires. And it also has some liability for the power company. It says that they are liable to the grantor, to the owner of the property, for loss and damage or destruction of property outside of that power line corridor. So they have some liability there. They have liability to cover all the costs of firefighting in that area if it is due to their negligence or omission of responsibilities that they have there. And I think that the city, this is a great opportunity for the city to partner really actively with the power company. I mean, not as a, something hanging over their head, but this is the agreement they have with the city. And that there could be, if they go up there once a year to clear, I mean, I think they could be up there much more often. They could be keeping that corridor clear, making that less of a fire hazard, because through all of these discussions, what we've heard is this is the major fire hazard. By putting a road in, particularly one that goes all the way down here, you're going to be increasing access into sensitive areas of the reserve. I think there's just no other way about it. We can try to discourage it up here, but it's making a way into an area that is not currently an obvious way to get in. And that's going to increase risk. If you have more people up there, it will increase the risk. So I think that's a real consideration. I don't know how much that plays in down here, but I think the power line opportunity here is really a good one to reduce the risk of the fire, because on Monday, one of the folks was saying the best way to fight a fire is when it's small. Yeah, but a better way to fight a fire is to prevent it, is to not have one in the first place. So that was my emphasis on that. I want to see where we agree here, and if it sounds like there's a lot of positive feeling about the proposal here. I'm still really unsettled about the the potential impacts of having incursion into the reserve there. I don't know what the city is. I haven't heard from the city that they've got a plan for mitigating that or managing the increased presence up there. And likewise, if it comes all the way down here, how are you going to actually manage it? You've got people in these more remote areas now. That's a real concern to me. But I think there's a lot that we agree on here too. So how should we go forward? We've got a presentation to council on Tuesday, and we've got two proposals that overlap in some ways. I think the committee has really taken care to try to back up our recommendations, but maybe we could go through and just see if we're if those really are the main sticking points, and if everything else is in agreement. I think we may have a basis to look at. I think ideally, if we could have a joint presentation, that would be great. Maybe there are some areas we still need to hash out, but I'd like to just get a sense from folks if that seems like a reasonable way to go forward, to just take a look at our recommendations. And I don't know if there's other thoughts on the power line question before we do that. We have about 15 minutes left.
Jolene, this is Bruce. I think that my position has been clear that I'm going to err on the side of public safety. And with the recommendation, and I think that I agree with the logic, or understand the logic of wanting to have multiple accesses in here. I'm also concerned about first responder safety, that if they've got to go ahead and hike this, that it's a lot more difficult, to go from here to do anything they've got to do than if they have an access someplace in the middle. So I think that we can take more time, and I did offer to change the date of the meeting on Tuesday. That is a self-imposed deadline, so we can adjust that. But it's going to take a lot for me to not recommend that we do this. And also the point that you make with, well, if more people go down there, we've got more possibility of fire. I think that in trying to deal with the possibilities, I think that we've got a very high possibility, or the highest probability is right in here, and that we should be ready to address it if it happens, rather than saying that, well, if somebody can now, walk down here and possibly cause a fire, that, we're going to be better off if we don't allow them to do that, as opposed to not having an access between here and there.
Okay.
So that'll be a difficult one for me to back off of.
Yeah, I understand. I was expressing my concern about that lower section.
I understand.
But I understand. Do you have any thoughts briefly about the power line issue and the city working more actively with the power company there? Kind of going back to that easement and looking at that, and I think the city has some
clout. We have some clout with it, there's no doubt. But when we work with the power company, if they're meeting the industry standards, and this section is really not a lot different to them than the rest of their entire district. And so they're trying to schedule their maintenance around what the overall needs are. And so I don't think you're going to see, they will come in, they'll do the cleanup and all that kind of stuff, and they want to work with us. But I don't know if you're going to see a radical change in what they're doing. I mean, we will approach them, but they've got the entire district with these conditions in it.
I understand. I think that the city, there's an opportunity here for the city to be really proactive and active with them. And maybe, I think it's in everybody's interest. They don't want to be liable for damages on the city's property, and the city wants everything to be in good working order. So I just want to highlight that because it's documented, and I think there's a good basis for that. And I think that if you can prevent it from happening in the power line, you've really solved 90. Sounds like, I don't want to put a percentage on it, but it sounds like that's the main concern. So.
And so you make a good point, and we do work with all of the other utilities and things around us, the other property owners, and we will follow up again. I'm just trying to, set the expectation that I don't believe that is going to be
Yeah.
our salvation.
Okay, I see that. Thank you. Betty, I see your hand up.
My question is, Bruce just said that they're dealing with this all over the state, but this section happens to be our water supply. Doesn't that put it a little higher on their agenda?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think we can press with that, and especially what happened with Lincoln City. If they can fix at least this section, put that on high priority, it seems like it would protect our water, the city water supply. And I think that should be a high priority for them.
Yeah, that's
I
great.
asked Alicia for a copy of her schedule of
Mhm.
all the replacement of these transformers, so we
Mhm.
know where that line lies within the schedule.
Mhm.
And I told her what our concern was and what was at risk in that area. So when she gives that to me, I'll pass it on to you and you can explain to the committee.
Okay.
Great.
It's a statewide project.
Thank you for that. That's great. We have about 10 minutes left, and I wondered if we could just go very quickly through the recommendations, not in detail at all, but I think we are really in agreement on the majority of these. There's some we haven't talked about, and I just want to see if staff is in alignment with that. I think we can move forward and perhaps just identify if there are any remaining areas or any additional recommendations we want to make to clarify here for Tuesday, or perhaps if folks want to wait at this point. I know the feeling on Monday was more to move forward on Monday, but perhaps at this point after today, we want to push it back a little bit. Can we take just a couple of minutes just to go through and kind of staff, if there is a known issue with one of these, let us know.
Well, I think that this is what we want to move forward with proposing. I think that it's sound from the standpoint of firefighting and also for the protection of the city and the citizens and the watershed.
I got that. Yes, thank you. I'm clear on that in terms of the roads, and our recommendations include some additional items related. And I just want to understand that we are on the same page with these before we go to council, just to make this efficient so we don't come back around again to something that staff hadn't perhaps attended to that wasn't specific to a road.
Staff is already working with Pacific Power on the, Jelaine, you asked me, the staff is already working with Pacific Power on the priorities and the condition of the lines and the transformers.
Yeah.
So if that's a recommendation, it's already happening.
Thanks. These are, I'm going to just touch on a couple of things here really quickly. Thank you for clarifying that. We talked about gates. So the understanding is that there will be gates at any of these roads. And clear posting about the restrictions. We're recommending that there be a no entry sign. We understand we can't do no trespassing, I believe, because it's not private property, but really signage that is going to discourage people from thinking this is an extension of the recreational area. I'm setting aside the piece about that lower section of Route B. We'll discuss as a committee where we want to go with that. I think we're in agreement on the Tolovana Road at this point in terms of keeping that clear, doing minimal maintenance, but not extending to the wetland. We also recommended developing a road decommissioning plan. That's part of both the stewardship plan update. It's also part of our OWEB agreement, that the city work with OWEB and Trout Mountain Forestry to properly decommission any abandoned and orphan roads, to have an organized plan for that, to make that a high priority in terms of work in the ECFR, and to set some 5-year goals and a timeline that's feasible, but really making that a high priority. So the folks who need to get in there for firefighting know what's workable, and we're decommissioning the other roads. Would we have agreement on that?
Yes.
Okay, great. And the other piece, the final piece, is just about prohibiting networking roads and connecting those up for any uses and specifically developing roads for evacuation as evacuation routes through the ECFR, any connecting of roads to move people from the city into the ECFR, that any evacuation routes, and this was something that I'm just reiterating what staff confirmed to the committee last year, that planning for evacuation routes is going to route people around the ECFR and not through it, and prohibiting the networking of roads. So we don't have a network of roads going through the ECFR or through the ECFR. That's the final piece. And of course you can look at our rationale, and we've cited our sources all the way through here, but that's the other piece I want to just confirm before we go on.
Jelaine, we can make that a statement in the report, but I don't know what's going to happen in the future. And if we were to say we're not going to connect roads, and then somebody found that there was a need to connect roads, they could change the plan and do that. So right now,
at a future plan update, but we're talking about this update. So
no, there's no intent to do anything like that in the next 5 years.
great. Okay. And then just affirming that it won't be used as evacuation route for emergency purposes. Okay, great. Well, thank you. We've got just a few more minutes. I'd like to just check in. I don't know, Barry, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the committee's memo did not mention the road in the southwestern portion.
No, we had not. We just learned about that yesterday.
That just came up. And so I wondered if you feel like you have enough information to comment on that one. I'm not sure if the committee members are as familiar maybe with that road and the condition it's in. I gave you a brief description of it, but I'm just curious to know if you feel like you have enough information at this point.
Well, I would love more information, and that's actually a perfect segue to maybe what would be the final question for today is, do we want to, at this point, how is the committee feeling about moving forward on Tuesday? Or do we want to take take a little bit more time after the conversation today, perhaps to check in about that lower road, and then see if we can work with staff to have a joint proposal going forward to council. So can I get a quick idea of that going around? Les, how do you feel about that at this point?
Les is muted. There we go.
Yeah, I just unmuted. Thank you, Bob. So I would love to have one recommendation to the council that we could all kind of agree to. And just based on the forest type map, I'm not as concerned about the road segment coming off to the southwest, although obviously I haven't looked at it or had any time to really think about it. I would actually like to propose that we accept the city's proposal with one additional agreement, that with regard to the last 1,800 feet or 1,300 feet, whatever the number was, of that road segment coming from Volmar, that it will be looked at with an eye toward absolutely minimizing the impact to that environment. I kind of understand the rationale for needing access to the power line there, and I'm willing to support that in any way. But I do think maybe there's still a way to do the least damage.
Okay.
And that's what we're going to do with anything, Les. And as I said, we're going to be working with Barry on any designs, construction, administration, anything like that.
And OWEB is going to have the last word on what's permitted or not permitted in the reserve. So I would say that any discussion of this really needs to have OWEB looped in, so that they can be advising prior to lots of plans being made in a sensitive area. They're gonna have to know about what's being proposed, and I think that they should be involved earlier. I want to be sensitive to the time. We've just got a minute. I know one of our members has to leave, so maybe we have a proposal. I think if this were adopted with that caveat, it would then change our recommendations. So what I'm hearing would happen is that we would then go back and revise our recommendations to be consistent with the staff's proposal, but with that caveat. does it make sense for us to wait and defer going to council on Tuesday? Do the committee members still feel strongly about going forward on Tuesday at this point? Or do we want to take one more pass, one more cycle to refine our recommendations? And first of all, see how we are on this proposal, and look at that South Road a little bit more before we go to council? That's my first question before one of our members has to leave. Do we want to pause or go forward Tuesday?
It seems to me that what I've heard is that there is not an urgency, that we're not up against a hard deadline on this. I think we've got a couple of questions that could be resolved with a little more examination if we put it off maybe to the following months.
Okay. And I also want to consider, now, Les, were you putting that proposal forward for a vote or as something for us to consider as we're going forward? I want to be orderly about this as much as I know.
Jelaine, at that point, I was simply trying to express my opinion as succinctly as possible. But since I'm taking up the committee's time, if we want to loop OWEB in, and I think that is very important, there's no way that we can do that before Tuesday.
That's right.
Can I say something about the OLED part?
Well, in just one second, Bruce, if I could, just because I know Stacy has to leave, can we get a vote? Are those in agreement on pausing until June on this to council? Those in favor? Oh, I don't know. I guess someone else has to propose that. Well, do we have a proposal about that?
Elaine, you can do it as kind of an informal head count. That doesn't
Okay,
have to
great,
be an official
great.
vote.
So are we agreed? Is there anyone opposed to the idea of pausing for a month?
This is Stacy. I'm opposed. I think we have good information. I think the city's given us a very good plan. And I think we should take it to council. And if they have questions, then they can certainly send it back to Parks. But I think we have a good plan to move forward with.
I think we should start the dialogue with city council on Tuesday. Let them know that we have some new information and because we don't know what they're thinking at all.
Okay. How about this then for a way forward? We will ultimately need to incorporate whatever we agree on the city's plan. We'll need to incorporate that into our recommendations. So that will take some revision just so that they comport with each other. So I can make those revisions. I can get them out to you guys on Monday to look at, and they will be, well, our choice is we either put our recommendations forward and the city has their plan, and they are, I think we are closer in alignment now than that will suggest if we have those two documents before council. I think it will be helpful if we go before council if we have something that represents closer to where we are now. I think we have a couple of questions. We've got the OWEB question. We've got that study of the last 1,800 feet on the Volmer Road, and we've got the lower road just to review a little bit more. So do we want to proceed with these two different documents, or I can make an effort over the weekend to try to get them a little bit more in alignment, but that means the committee will have to review them Monday, and then they will have to get put into the packet for Tuesday, and I don't know that council will have a chance to see them before we present.
It sounds as though there's a possibility that you would make a presentation to the council saying, this is where we stand. We want to bring you up to date, but we are anticipating having more to say to you and ask you not to bring this to a vote at this point, but consider that we're not keeping you in the dark here. And this is the progress that we've made.
Okay, great. So more like a progress report with a draft that updates our understanding as of today.
I'd be comfortable with that.
Okay, is everybody comfortable with that? We'll do it like a progress report and then come back with final recommendations for the following month.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, and then Bruce, I did want to get back because you had a comment about OWEB. I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page kind of logistically before if anybody has to leave. Thank
Right,
you.
okay. First, the OWEB is relatively easy. We have to present something to OWEB for them to comment, and that's the point that we're at. And so hopefully we can get that resolved.
Okay, great. And I think
I'm
if
not
there are
done.
remaining differences or just areas that we want them to look at specifically, we can include that and just say this is an area that we still have some question about. So, yeah.
It depends on what the decision of the council is. If the council decides to move forward with the proposal that we're looking at on the screen, I don't know if it's appropriate for anybody to say, well, we want you to take another look at this particular part of it. I think it's the council's decision is what the city is moving forward with.
Well, I understand, Bruce. I'm just saying that OWEB is the final,
I get that.
OWEB has to agree. So if there could be a proposal here, but if there are still questions or if we are asking for further analysis, if the committee wants a little more attention to that last 800 feet, just from an environmental perspective, that would be, I think, part of OWEB's work and part in this, because whatever is proposed, they're going to have to approve.
Yeah, but I don't agree with that, Jelaine.
Well, I think that is the agreement with OWEB is that
No, it's not. No.
any activity in.
The city has an agreement with OWEB. The
Yeah.
Parks Committee does not.
Exactly.
The Parks Committee is advisory to the council. If the council makes a decision to move forward with a particular approach, the Parks Committee does not make a side proposal or have side meetings with OWEB. So you're making recommendations to the council, and the council will decide what's going to move forward.
Exactly. I was simply saying that whatever the council takes to OWEB, any activity in the ECFR, let me say it that way, any activity in the ECFR, including the roads or anything else, OWEB needs to approve of, because it needs to be in agreement with that easement, with that conservation easement and the primary conservation values there. So yes, of course, it would be the city and the council that would be proposing this, but OWEB is going to need to review it and they are going to need to look at it. And I think if the committee has any concerns, any remaining concerns, it's appropriate to include those so that OWEB is aware of the concerns. Not that the committee would be going directly to them, but just that they're included so they know the different views. But as I said, I think we're largely in alignment.
I don't agree with that. If the council makes a decision that they're going to put something forward and they don't have a problem with making that change on the Volmer road system, then that's it. That's what the proposal goes in.
Well, yes, that's the proposal. OWEB will need to approve
But
any.
that's the proposal, and we're not going to say, but we want you to look at this. The relationship with OWEB is with the city and not
Yes.
with the committee.
Yes,
You are advising the council.
I'm
But
affirming
you're
that.
saying- But you are saying about additional concerns that go on. If the council has those concerns, then they should go to OWEB. If you have those concerns and the council makes another decision, it is not appropriate for you to go to OWEB with that. You can go as a personal, as an individual citizen, but not representing the city or putting in a counter proposal to the city.
Yeah, I was in no way suggesting anything of that kind at all. Yeah, that was in no way anything I meant to suggest or imply. I was simply talking about the conversation between the city and the committee, recognizing that the city and the council will put whatever forward to OWEB, and then OWEB will need to approve any activity in the reserve as that is, and making sure that it's consistent with the conservation easement. So
Agreed.
I want to be very clear. There's no suggestion that anything's going to happen outside of that path. And the committee is free to include any additional input they might have to council. And that's yeah, great.
Correct.
So we're all clear on that. That's good.
Good.
Well, we've gone a bit over.
No,
We've gone a bit
wait,
over.
no.
I want to be. I'm sorry. Was there more?
I'm sorry, I'm not done because I think this is important. I think that going in and making a recommendation and the committee making a recommendation that you have caveats on the quality of the work or the way that the staff, I guess you're looking at, would be doing the work within the ECFR. I don't think that's appropriate. Unless, if you have a problem with, how staff is handling things or how staff is handling the ECFR, then we need to talk about it. But I think if you go in and make a recommendation that you have a caveat, then the implication is you think the work is not going to be done from an environmentally sensitive way. And I think that's a real issue going into this meeting.
Well, I'm just hearkening back to, we've had some input. I've expressed my thoughts about that lower section, and Les mentioned that might be worth having OWEB look at. And I think there is more discussion to have. I think it makes sense for us to have a status update with council. My hope is that we will be able to be unified on recommendations to council. I mean, that would be, I think, the ideal situation. And yet, if there are still some remaining questions, I think those can be included without it suggesting that we aren't largely in agreement here. So I think I hear you loud and clear, and I think we're clear on our role. And I also want to make sure that if there are remaining areas that we'd like consideration on, or that we think OWEB should take another look at, or OWEB and Trout Mountain together, just environmentally, that's important, because the lenses are different. As Rick said on Monday, we are looking through different lenses, and there's a lot of overlap there, but some of them emphasize different things, and we just need to make sure that everything's being considered. Our primary job is a stewardship, advocates for stewardship in the ECFR. So thanks to everybody. Is there any other comment before we go to good of the order? I really do appreciate the discussion today. I think we're much further along, but just want to see if anyone has anything else to add related to this last exchange or anything else. Okay, so my plan is to make some revisions based on the conversation today as I understand them. Well, yeah, I can't comment on that third road because we haven't had a chance to talk about it. I will try to see if we need to make any revisions based on the conversation today. I'll email you all through Kelsey. If I have any revisions, I'll get those out to you as soon as I can. And if it seems more appropriate to just include kind of where we are in the presentation to council, then maybe we'll just do it in a presentation rather than trying to revise all of this material before Tuesday. But we'll, at this point, plan on giving an update to council on Tuesday. So is there anything else for good of the order before we conclude today? Okay, thank you all so much. I appreciate it. I know there are there's a lot of feeling and commitment around this, and I think we're getting closer to an aligned position. So I appreciate it. Thanks, Barry, for making time and for your feedback and all of this. And we'll be checking in down the road. So at this point, we are adjourned, and I thank you all. Have a good rest of your day, and feel free to reach out if you have questions or want to follow up with me about anything. Again, I really want to thank staff for being available for this morning, and Jason for